So I look at that now and I just can't believe we missed such a glaring omission to the team, that here we are on a podcast called the Shock Absorber Podcast, and we're talking about Shock Absorber church planting, which is all about bringing old people and young people together to plant churches together. And because we'd gone with this theme of let's just invite people to think about whether they want to choose to come along, we hadn't asked any young people to join the team. And as it turned out, it was just adults who joined the team, and there weren't any teenagers or young adults in the team. So we actually missed that because we didn't have a youth coordinator who probably would have said, hey, where's the youth in our church?
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Shock Absorber podcast. It is very exciting to have you with us and to have us in your ears or in your eyes as well if you're watching it on the video. We are here at a very cold Sorroval Kirrawee, and probably one of the downsides, Stu, co-host, how are you? Sorry.
Yes, good, thanks, Joel.
One of the downsides that we have in being in a factory here at Kirrawee is it gets very cold.
It does get cold.
Yes, you have a very warm jacket on today.
Yes, I do.
Is that your Sharkies jacket?
It's an NRL wellbeing jacket though. Yeah,
because you're part of that team.
Well, yes. Yes, so I'm the chaplain to Cronulla Sharks.
Yes. Is that an exciting thing to do? Do you like you get to meet all the footy players?
Yeah, I meet some footy players, yeah. So we're in the NRL in Australia. We have a rugby league wellbeing team that looks after all the players, and part of those teams are chaplains. So yeah, I'm part of the chaplain I'm a chaplain in the wellbeing team for Cronulla Sharks.
Yeah, right. And what's your ideal, or what's your role in that? What do you have to do?
Well, it's player support. It's particularly supporting all the players, but particularly if there are players with faith, and there's many of them in the NRL, particularly those with the Pacifica background. So yeah, supporting them.
Yeah, awesome. And you love doing it?
Together? Oh, I love it. Yeah, we meet lots of good people.
Yeah, that's cool. A lot of people at our church like that you work for the Sharks as well.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty popular team around our neck of the woods.
Yeah, that's right. Now, we always like to start, well, we often like to start an episode with talking about a movie that relates to where Sorroval Church was at. Do you have a movie for us today,
Well,
Stu?
actually, I don't only have a movie for us today, Joel. I have a whole series of movies.
Right.
Because I was thinking, seeing as we're talking about trying to plant churches quickly and cheaply, I thought maybe, is there a movie franchise that has that theme? And I thought of Fast and Furious. So I don't know how cheap they are to produce, but
See, I was going to say, they make a lot of money, I think.
They do. I think
maybe because they are cheap. No,
well, maybe that's where the comparison ends, because we don't make a lot of money. But they're fast and they're furious. So we're into this part of the podcast in the next couple of episodes. We're looking at how quickly can we plant churches and how fast can we do ministry. So Fast and Furious church planting. There you go.
Right. Have you seen all? I think we're up to number 9's about to come out. Have you seen all 9?
I actually haven't seen one in total. I haven't even seen one of the movies in total.
Well, I'm so glad you applied that to this week's podcast.
I know, but it's F9's coming out, and apparently it's causing a stir, and I think The Rock's in it. Is that right?
Yes, and I think John Cena, another wrestler. So
okay,
they're just adding wrestlers in there.
Yeah. I did see a short where a truck that was like a B-double that had like 2 or 3 trailers on the back flipped over. So it didn't look very realistic.
Is that why you're trying to apply to how church went for us?
Well, some of our experiments haven't been super realistic,
yep,
and some of them have. So the fun of the next couple of episodes is to look at some of the things that we've discovered and also some of the mistakes we've made, and really looking forward to telling the story because it's been an adventure.
Yeah, because we kind of started that on the last episode talking about how we planted our 3rd gathering, which was on a Sunday morning, and some of the things that we learnt from that, and also scaling ministry teams to be able to have the capacity to have 3 services. As we went into 2017, could you kind of position us and tell us where we were at that time as a church?
Yeah, so we were expanding the number of gatherings we were having at the Kirrawee site here at Kirrawee with the factory, and our bishop actually talked to us one day and said, "Look, you guys could keep expanding in Kirrawee, but have you thought about planning more churches as well and thinking of more campuses?" And so we took his comments on board and we had a good think about it. And he thought that even though it was great that Soul Revival was growing, he originally was the one who told us that there's 250,000 people who live in our area and only 1% of them go to church, maybe 4% at the most. depending on what sort of metrics you use. And that's not a lot of people, really. And even though Soul Revival by this stage had grown to 200 or 300 people, there was just so many people to reach. And the bishop was saying, why don't we keep planting churches? Because we want to see our existing churches grow and we want to keep planting more churches. So we took that on board. We talked to the parish council, our council at Soul Revival, and we had a big discussion as a whole church leadership team about, did we feel like we had the resources and the leadership to be able to stretch again to try and plant what would in effect be a fourth gathering, but this one off-site. And we thought we'd give it a go.
When the bishop brought that question to you, were you originally thinking that that's where the direction of the church would head, in planting more locations?
Yeah, not to start off with. No,
right.
we were just thinking of planting a church. So it was a new thought to have. Yeah.
Yeah, and how does that work in excuse me, in different areas that you're trying to look about where you should actually plant? How does that work in the Anglican system, and do you have to be careful of not treading on people's patches and those kind of things?
Yeah, well, in the Anglican system, we've divided up Sydney into what we call parishes, and in that parish system, the whole city is covered. But when those parishes were first established, the demographics were very different in terms of the numbers of people living in those parishes. So, for example, in Gymea Anglican's parish, there would have probably been, a couple of thousand people when the church was first started 7 years ago. Today, there's 17,000 people. So even if we tried to reach those 17,000 people through the church at Gymea, there would still be a real difficulty fitting them all in the building, even if lots of those people came along. So we were thinking that it was time to continue to church plant. We have an organisation in our denomination called the ENC. So we felt like working with ENC and local ministers, it would be a good thing to see if there were any ministers in the Shire who would be okay with us planting another church, what was considered to be within their parish. And so we talked to Cronulla Anglican's minister, Rich Wendon, and I went and had a coffee with Rich and talked about the idea we had about planting a church not in Cronulla itself, but in the adjoining suburb of Woolooware, which was still in his parish, so to speak. And Rich was very gracious, and he said, yeah, that'd be fine. And we talked over the coffee that rather than trying to compete with the different churches there, we wanted to sort of somehow work out how could we build an ecosystem of ministry in the area, and we could all work together. So part of the conversation was, how could we plant a church in Woolooware? And part of the conversation was also, is there anything that we as Soul Revival can do in partnership with Cronulla Anglican to work together in ministry? And so Rich said, planting in Woolooware was fine, and would it be something you could consider to help us with our youth group, because they didn't have a youth group at the time. Okay. And because we've had so much experience with youth ministry over the years, we said yeah. So I actually offered to go down myself on a Friday night with a couple of our youth leaders, and for a year I went down on a Friday night with our youth leaders, and we helped plant a church with Rich and the team down at Cronulla, and they had a team down at Cronulla too, and it was a really fun year. We had 3 or 4 youth leaders from Cronulla, 2 or 3 from Soul Revival, and we worked together on Friday night. And where there wasn't a youth group, by the end of the year, there was probably about 12 teenagers that were coming along. So that was really fun.
That's really, really cool.
Yeah, it was.
It was fun. That must be, is that pretty rewarding for you to put in that effort, like with just a few people from both churches, and be able to see that people will be able to come along to a youth group?
Yeah, it was. And I was really blessed by you guys, because the rest of the leadership team at Soul Revival blessed that initiative because of the idea of working together. Over many years, Soul Revival's been trying to network with other Christian ministries, and we've really enjoyed the amount we've learnt and received from that, as well as being able to provide. And I think some of our leaders that went down to Cronulla got way more out of it than even Cronulla Anglican did in terms of how they grew in that experience. And so, yeah, it was just a really, really fun thing to do together. And Rich and I are friends, so it was really good to grow that friendship through that too. So yeah, it was fun.
Oh, that's awesome. So we kind of like you've got the big items ticked off whether you're going to choose to plant off-site. So obviously backing of the church, we got the Soul Revival Council, we agreed to that, and the wardens.
That's right. Yeah.
Then we got an area, Woolooware, and then chatting with the people that are around in that area. What was the next thing we need? I'm guessing that we probably needed someone to actually run it.
Yeah, well, that's a good leading, because like I didn't actually go around and talk to other ministers other than the Anglican minister of the area, but we were because we were going to plant a new church, we put on a new staff member, and that new staff member was Jai McMordie, and we interviewed Jai, and Jai came on staff. And when one of the things that Jai did before we actually planted the church was to talk to some of the other denominations as well, so that we could talk about being friendly with the other denominations. And he also started getting involved with the local scripture. But when Jai did scripture in the high school and in the primary school, he was encouraging the children and the teenagers to go to Cronulla Anglican as we'd started that new youth group. So that was a really lovely partnership that we were able to set up with Jai.
Yeah, cool. Well, Jai's no real stranger to us, is he really? Because he's been around since we've known him at Jai Anglican. Do you want to give us a little bit more background on him and where he's been and where he's come from?
Yeah, so the beginning of Jai's story, well, when I met Jai was back in the late 1990s when Jai came along as a teenager to Soul Revival one night as a non-Christian teenager. He'd just been up the pub actually and was walking past the church and thought he'd go in and see what was going on, and sat up the back and actually I was given a talk at the time describing and explaining the gospel, and Jai decided to become a Christian that night, and he became a Christian, and that was lovely. And then Jai went on to be a youth leader at our youth program, and then he actually went and trained at SMBC and later at Moore College and became a minister, and he's now an ordained minister. So after he'd been a minister with us for a while at Gymea, he moved to Helensburgh for a few years, which is down further south from us, and then further south again and in a place called Nowra. Jai served there for a while. So over the last 7 years before he came back as our church planting pastor, he'd been ministering in those other two churches. So when we thought we'd put on a church planting pastor, we invited him to think about it, and he was really keen. And Jai and Christine and the kids moved up to Soul Revival as the church planting pastors.
It was a real pleasure to have them back in the Soul Revival fold, just because he would be a really influential part of my life, being a youth leader at Gymea, leading all the way from, I mean, I'd known him since we were in I was in year 9 was when I first met him, and he'd been my leader for a long time. So it's cool to have him back. He also understands what we're trying to do around all stage ministry.
Yeah, he's very committed to that.
And all that kind of stuff, so that's really cool. Okay, so we've got a leader, and we've got an area, and people mainly agreeing on what we're going to do. What's the next step?
Well, our early thought was that instead of tapping people on the shoulder and asking them to go to plant this new church, we thought we would do what we'd done with our Friday night and our Sunday morning gathering and just put it out to the church. Is anyone interested in helping with the Woolooware group? And 25 people put their hand up and said, yeah, we'd be really interested to be a part of the launch team. And so that group of people got together, and we decided to greenhouse those people. And we talked at an earlier episode that greenhousing is like when you have got a plant and you put it in a pot in a greenhouse, it gives it a chance to develop root systems and go stronger, so that by the time you plant it out in the full sun in the garden, it's a bit stronger and healthier. So the idea we had was, let's get our launch team and greenhouse them and help them to connect and think about through what we were trying to do together. And when they were ready, then we'd plant the church. That was the idea.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but we wanted to make sure that this wasn't a siloed campus away from where we were originally, where we still are at Kirrawee. We wanted to be still part of Soul Revival Church, but just at a different location.
Yeah.
What did we do in that sense to try and ensure that didn't happen?
Yeah, so one of the things we first said with the original launch team back in 2011 is that even though our team will get bigger and more diverse, we wanted to be one team, and we'd work together as a church, as you said. And so what we went through with the launch team were two things. First of all, the launch team came from Soul Revival, so they were already Soul Revival members. And then secondly, that team went through again together our theology, which is summarised by Jesus Changes Everything, our strategy, all age, all stage strategy of the church to share the truth and love of Jesus person to person, generation to generation, culture to culture, and place to place. And then thirdly, the team looked at practical mission and discipleship at Woolooware that would be the same and different. So we had the same DNA, the same community, and then on top of that, we talked about having certain things during the year that we all gathered around. So we already were gathering around Easter and Christmas as a whole church. We also had our week away in the middle of the year where the whole church went away on holidays together once a year. And so those three things were things we thought would also help the Woolooware team stay connected. But we also had intention that instead of just sending out Woolooware as a daughter plant, if Soul Revival Kirrawee was like the mother church and then sending out a daughter church, the mother-daughter church model is that the daughter church then has to make it pretty much on their own.
Come self-sustaining.
Yeah, self-sustaining. And about 80% of mother-daughter churches don't actually succeed because the resources aren't there for that group, particularly when we had a smaller group like we did with 25. We already had thought that through. And so instead of doing the mother-daughter plant, we thought we would do the spoke and hub model. Sorry, the hub and spoke model, which we talked about last week.
Yep.
The hub and spoke model was, let's use Kirrawee, particularly Saturday night, as like a hub for the ministry. And then the Woolooware church would be like a spoke of that. And so we talked about that with the Woolooware team and the rest of the church at the same time, preparing everyone for this new reality where we'd have a fourth service, but this would be the first one off-site.
Okay. And in that sense, does that help share resources and like the larger Kirrawee supposedly hub can support different spokes in the way that it needs to?
Yeah, well, instead of just the 25 people raising the wage for Jai, we had 225 or however many giving people that we had. So that was one example, but we also had our 10 service teams. And so we'd already scaled up our ministries into our 10 service teams where our volunteers were organised into things like kids and youth, arts, communication, hospitality, welcoming, all these different ministries. And we had central coordinators in charge of each of those ministries and gathering coordinators working in teams. And so all we really needed to do was find enough people to be gathering coordinators of those 10 service teams for Woolooware, and that system would be still expandable. And that's why the hub and spoke model is really good if you've got some kind of expandable leadership model.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, sorry, I've got a lot of coffee. I had some grilled before we recorded this podcast. I was getting stuck in my throat. We were obviously greenhousing, as you said.
Yep.
Building up the gathering in order to get ready to actually plant it. But I think that you said that you revisited the 5 L's model. Is that correct? That was from Geneva, wasn't it?
Geneva, yeah. We went to that conference once where they talked about the 5 L's you need to start a church, and I think there was launch team, leader is the
Which
first
we had
one.
Jai.
Jai is the leader. We had a launch team of 25 people.
Yep.
We the model says you need lots of money. Well, the hub and spoke model covers that because the whole church could pay for the rent of the new premises, the new things we'd need to buy for Woolooware, but also the finances for Jai. So that was covered. The location, well, we again in the greenhouse we identified that as one of the issues that we needed to work out. How are we going to find a location? And the other thing is the legals. Well, the legals was covered again by the hub church, and we were able to cover off on insurance and things like that. But coming back to the location, the launch team together started looking around for different locations that we could meet. We couldn't find anything in Woolooware that we could meet in that was similar to the factory. So we thought we'd bite the bullet and try a school and meet in a school hall. Yeah. That's where we went with that.
I was going to ask though, I like to always find out the alternate view sometimes, is that obviously we went and decided to go ahead with a 4th gathering. Was there some opposition to that? Did people think that we didn't have enough people? Did we think that we were spread too thin?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, and what will probably come out in this podcast is I think we're a bit naive on some of those things. We were fast and furious and trying to really, we were excited about experimenting. So this was an experiment. One of the things we like to do at Soul Revival is build a bridge to a new reality. So we kept everything going at Kirrawee as usual, and we found a group of people that we would support and care for so that they wouldn't get burnt by anything going wrong. But at the same time, if things didn't work out at Woolooware, they could come back into Kirrawee and that'd be fine. But having said that, we thought, let's experiment and try some new things. So the prevailing logic is that you probably are best to plant with 50 people, not 25, because 50 people is more likely to grow quicker and more likely to survive. And I think that's correct. But what we thought we would do is we'd already planted Soul Revival itself in 2011 with just 30 people, and we planted Friday with just 15, and we planted Sunday morning with 25. So we wanted to test to see if they were just flukes or if there was some other thing going on there, or if that was something we could achieve going forward. So with the 25 people, though, I think we probably were too few to start off with. So I think there was a bit of discussion in the leadership team about that, and we were a bit worried because there were some signs that I didn't notice enough and we didn't notice enough early on. So one of them was we didn't have enough musicians who could actually go to Woolooware. We were hoping that Woolooware would generate that. But our own logic was don't plant unless we've got 10 service teams, and one of them was the arts team, and that's a really important one. Of the 10 service teams we have, we think that 4 of them are most important. It's welcoming, kids, hospitality for us, because that's what we do our cooking with, and the arts team. And when we started Woolooware, we didn't have a lot of musicians and a lot of people that can get the music going properly, and I think that was probably identified by some people, but I probably could have listened better to that feedback, because as it turned out, that was one of the things that stretched us a bit when we started.
Can I ask you 2 follow-up questions about that? Why those 4 service teams are the most important? Why do we see them as the most important? And then secondly, what is the arts team? Because it's not just, we shouldn't clarify, it's not just musicians. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, tell us about those 4 teams. Why are they the most important?
Well, so, and I'll try and answer it with regard to Woolooware too. So we just thought it might be too much to try and set up 10 service teams, like things like kids and youth at the same time, setting up our training ministry and our community groups. We thought maybe some of those things are important, but maybe they could wait a little. Like, so kids was really important because people would come along with kids. But we had a youth ministry at Kirrawee, and we thought maybe the youth from Woolooware could go to the Kirrawee ministry. So maybe we didn't need that service team at Woolooware. We thought, well, we've got training at Kirrawee. Maybe the training isn't important. So it wasn't that some of the service teams are more important than others. We just asked what's like a skeleton staff, like what to
prioritise.
Yeah, that's a better word. What's a priority?
Yeah.
And we thought of those 4, but I think that was a mistake in hindsight to think of it like that.
Yeah.
Because it meant that we hit the ground, rather than hitting the ground running, we hit the ground scrambling. So the furious part was meaning we weren't going as fast as we could have. I think that was holding us back a bit.
Okay. And then my second question around that was, what does the arts team encompass? So what are you doing within the arts team if you are part of that team?
Yeah. So the arts team, we've just selected these names. Other people can use other names for things, but just if people are wondering what a service team is, it's just a grouping of ministries that can work together to support each other. We thought that would be helpful to have some kind of leadership and communication between the church to do that. So we have the arts team, including, as I already said, the people who play music and lead us in singing. We have the people who do the overhead, the proclaim ministry, the digital part of the service.
Just to do the song lyrics up on the screen.
Song lyrics, Bible verses, stuff like that. Also, the sound engineering is part of that team. And also we've put in that team the Bible reading and the prayer and the preaching. And so, that just makes sense to us that we put all those ministries together. And those ministries together were probably the key ministries that it would take to actually run a church, the formal part of a church service.
Right. Some people possibly think that preaching and prayer shouldn't be in there. Do you want to explain why you think it belongs in there?
Some people have asked me, why is that? Yeah. Like, is arts, again, it's a bit subjective. People can use whatever word they want for this kind of a team, but I like the idea that preaching is a kind of art form, that it's a way of taking the word of God and helpfully explaining it to people is a really important part of our gathering together. Is reading the Bible an art? Well, actually, putting effort into reading and reading well so it's clear is a bit of an art, actually, I think. Praying as an art, I don't know, maybe you could say it's not really an art form, but I get really encouraged to hear someone who's been thoughtfully preparing their prayers and then they pray beautifully in terms of being sincere and honest and helpful in the way they lead God's people in prayer. So those things, you could call them art, so you could call them something else, but for our purposes, we just put them together in that team because that was what was bringing our formal gathering together. And as I said earlier, the problem with our arts team was we didn't have quite enough musicians who were available to come to the Woolooware group. We decided to put Woolooware on a Sunday afternoon, and so part of the reason people could or couldn't come was their availability. And we put it on a Sunday afternoon because we're already doing a Sunday morning service, and that's one of the reasons we did that. But so the arts team that's pretty much what I think we thought through with that.
Speaking on doing it on a Sunday afternoon, maybe we should just let people know. We always like to let people know when we planted a new gathering what kind of order we do things in. It's always a similar strategy, as we like, but the practice is slightly different. So I think it's a little bit different on a Sunday afternoon. I think it's still kind of a time when we start to come in and just say hey and chat to everyone. Do you want to run through the next part after that?
Yeah, so in the launch team, as we were greenhousing it, we talked about how important it would be to have a formal service. We wanted to continue to have a coffee time. We wanted to continue to have a meal. And so they were three big things. We wanted to have kids ministry as a part of it as well. And we talked about starting earlier originally at 4:30 so kids could get home earlier. And the 4:30 start was with coffee and tea. And then we had, time to chat and we could do the kids' teaching time. And then after that, we did the service. And the service on Sunday afternoon was the same kind of service you would get at Kirrawee. And then afterwards, we did dinner. And I think the thing that was different was doing dinner on a Sunday night in a school hall was very difficult because they just had like a little canteen. So we made the exciting decision to get a caravan. And out of the caravan, we could serve coffee and street food. So we decided to go for a street food vibe in a school with this caravan. We got the caravan from Spitfire Caravans down in Melbourne, and we decorated it up and put We Are Soul Revival on the side, and it was very exciting. And we use that to this day. It's been a great asset to our church.
Yeah, because we also use it at different other things where we can hopefully inject a bit of ministry into different times.
Yeah, exactly.
Just going back to the service teams, I know that you said, I really appreciate the way that you are reflecting on what didn't work. I know that across these, the Shock Absorber podcast, we've kind of talked about all the things that went really well for us. So when we start talking about something that's like, oh, actually maybe we went too hard or we just missed this or this didn't work, I think that's really cool that you bring that up. You said that we really learned that we probably need everyone from 10 service teams. Was there any other one on reflection of Woolooware and how that played out that you think we should have had prior to actually planting that service?
Yeah, well, we had welcoming and we have a world team for world mission. We didn't put that one in straight away, and I think we should have, because then straight away we would have been talking about the fact that we were into local and global mission from the very beginning. And so that was obviously something that we didn't hit the ground running on. We had this sense that we were reaching out to the community, but when it came to actually enacting that, we didn't actually have many strategies other than the fact that we thought that we'd use our website, which would been quite effective in the past for introducing ourselves in the area. I think websites are like the modern door knocking. And so we thought if people in the area are looking for a church, they'd look for us on the website. But in hindsight, I think if we'd have thought about it with our world team, we would have thought that, going to a school, that's not a third place. And one of our really important strategies is third place theory, which is that we're going to plant a church as a place where people will come and have community and come to hang out and come and do church. But people don't go to schools to hang out and have parties. They go to schools as second places in terms of workplaces. So a school was like a second place, not a third place. So I think if we'd have started our world team earlier, they might have actually helped us to think that through quicker, that if we're going to reach people in their first places, their homes, we've got the internet, we can use Facebook, we can use social media to get the word out, but we can also just be more conscious that actually the place we planted might not actually be the right place. And as it turned out later, we found that one of the reasons we think we haven't grown as much as we probably have at Kirrawee in Woolooware was a lot of it was the feedback we're getting is because we're in a school and people found that a difficult place to get to in our area of Sydney. So that was the World and the Welcoming team. We had a kids team, but we didn't have a youth team. So I look at that now and I just can't believe we missed such a glaring omission to the team that here we are on a podcast called the Shock Absorber podcast and we're talking about Shock Absorber church planting, which is all about bringing old people and young people together to plant churches together. And because we'd gone with this theme of let's just invite people to think about whether they want to choose to come along, we hadn't asked any young people to join the team. And as it turned out, it was just adults who joined the team and there weren't any teenagers or young adults in the team. So we actually missed that because we didn't have a youth coordinator who probably would have said, hey, where's the youth in our church? So that was the fourth one. Our hospitality and our life support. Well, hospitality was quite big for the group. We'd set that up, but we missed the idea of the life support team. And again, I think that was a big mistake because I think setting up and packing up in schools is really tiring. And if we had a life support team, which is helping with our pastoral care and looking after people within the church, that coordinator probably would have picked up earlier that, yes, it was becoming burdensome over months of setting up and packing up in a school hall. to run that, and they might have been able to have that filter on, that ministry hat on, as well as those two ministries. We've also got Berea and community groups. Now, we did start some community groups, but they interestingly didn't really connect with our network of community groups as easily as the ones we'd started at Kirrawee. And I think it's because we didn't have a coordinator in the ministry team who was trying to help the different Bible study leaders to connect with other people in other Bible studies. And the Berea team with training, well, again, it's a glaring example, but training is such a part of everything we do, and we weren't training our people as we went in Woolooware as we went. So I think because we were fast and furious with getting Woolooware going,
just going to bring that up every time.
I'm going to try to. But because we did that, we went a bit too quick, I think, and we probably could have slowed down a bit and waited until we had our music sorted, our youth ministry sorted, and particularly our community groups and our training ministry. But the other one we haven't mentioned yet is our communications team.
Right.
And again, the communications team in our church works with our world ministry. Our world ministry is interested in helping to connect us with our world partners, our Indigenous friends out in Western New South Wales, and also our friends in Papua New Guinea that we work with. But it's also about local mission and connecting with local people. And the communication team works with the local evangelism in our context really well, because the communication teams is working out how do we do podcasts, how do we do our website, how do we get our social media going. And you've been doing a terrific job of that, but because we didn't have a communications person on the ground, I don't think we were communicating to the suburb as well as we could have.
Right. And I think also, like, even you're saying with the school, like you can be a long way from the street, for example, so just communicating that could be a little bit difficult. But it makes a lot of sense when you're talking about a school being a second place and us going into a second place rather than creating a third place. And I hadn't realised that before, so that's a really good learning, even though it was difficult to have to go through it.
Yeah, and it didn't mean that the church failed. It's just that one of the things that we'll talk about in coming weeks, coming podcasts, is that Woolooware remained at about 25 to 30. It has been a thriving community in the sense that there have been some people who've come from the community to join the church plant. There have been people who were at Kirrawee and not heaps invested at Kirrawee who've become really invested at Woolooware, so that's been terrific. It's been a really lovely, thriving spiritual ministry in that we've been preaching the gospel and growing together, and the discipleship's been great. But because the mission of the church has been hindered by, I think, the school and the lack of young people and the lack of those other ministries that we just talked about, I think the experiment actually proved to us, I suppose, that what we were thinking about with the shock absorber actually was right, even though we missed it ourselves. Yeah. So that was quite ironic.
No, that's and it's funny that we're speaking as if, like, with all these learnings, that as if it doesn't exist anymore. It does.
It does.
I think that's what's really important, is that it was an experiment, like you said, and perhaps we had to go through that to learn, well, this is what we have to be aware of when we are doing off-site.
Yeah.
I think
I'd just like to say on that too. Yeah, I think the other thing I love about Woolooware is, yes, the ministry is continuing to go, and that's why I was trying to say that it is really thriving.
Yeah.
But also we'd really long to see more people come to know Jesus, and so our desire to continue to reach out to more people means we just keep looking at what we're doing and then working out what are the parts that are working, what are the parts that aren't working, and we keep iterating. So within the Woolooware experiment, we're continuing to go, how can we keep adding new resources to that so that it can actually continue? And what did we learn from all of that? And so with that, we've learnt a lot. And the community, I love being a part of that community down at Woolooware. Just as a side note, I've got a real heart for that suburb of Woolooware, and I'm still really committed to it as we continue that ministry down in that part of the Shire. Because when I was only 7 years old, I was part of Woolooware Congregational Church. And back in the 70s, the Uniting Church formed, and many congregational churches joined the Uniting Church in Australia. And when the Woolooware Congregational Church joined the Uniting Church, they closed Woolooware Congregational Church.
Right.
And as a young kid, I was just in the Sunday school at Woolooware Congregational, and I've got this really distinct memory of standing on the side of the road as our minister, Ken, and his wife, Pam, drove off with their white van all loaded up with their worldly goods to move to somewhere else. And I remember looking at all the people on the side of the road. Some people were crying, some people were waving and wishing him the best. And I remember saying to my mum and dad, why are we closing the church down? This is like breaking up a family.
Yeah.
And I remember that day thinking to myself that it'd be just wonderful if we could start that church again one day, because I get sad when churches close. And I think it was really exciting to be able to start a church in Woolooware again. So that was really delightful. But also it's really delightful to think that we can continue to start new works and experiment in new ways and not be afraid of taking a few risks, because it was through the risks and through the experiment that we learnt what we weren't doing right. But because we were loving each other at Woolooware, we were able to learn within the context of relationship and friendship. And there were moments of frustration and difficulty in that learning experience, but it was also really well led by Jai, I think, and he's a really, really good pastor. And so that meant that we didn't lose lots of people as we continued to try and work out how to make that work. So I'm really thankful to God for Jai and the Woolooware crew and all the things we've learnt to that. And I'm really excited that we're still going, particularly if I could get back in a time machine and tell that little kid on the side of the road, hey, don't worry, the church will start up again one day in Woolooware. Yeah. I think that would be a fun thing. Maybe I've watched too much Back to the Future movies.
Not really Fast and the Furious, those ones, but that's a really beautiful story, actually, and something I didn't know about you, so that's really cool. Do you want to just fill us in, like we're talking about how Woolooware is still going. Just recently we've kind of battened down the hatches and figured out we need to change a few things, and just gone through a soft relaunch of that. Do you want to fill us in on the details of that and what Jai's been doing?
Yeah, well, we'll go into some more detail in future podcasts, but over COVID, we had to go to digital for all our gatherings at Soul Revival Church, and we continued to get the Woolooware group to continue to meet and record every Sunday, and that kept the continuity going through COVID. When we started to come out of COVID, and we're still in COVID, but it's lessening its effects at the moment.
Less restrictions.
Yeah, less. And those restrictions started to lessen last year. But when they started to lessen, we thought for a temporary measure we'd move Woolooware back to Kirrawee because we couldn't go into the school again because of the COVID restrictions in public schools. But when we were able to, we were ready to, and we were going really well and thriving during that time, having Woolooware back at the Kirrawee factory too. But then when we went to relaunch it, we thought, if the school is holding us back, why don't we look into whether there's any other options? And again, we went back to our friends at Cronulla Anglican, and Richard Wendon has moved on since then, but we talked to the wardens at Cronulla Anglican and asked if we could rent the hall at Cronulla Anglican instead of being at the school, and they were incredibly gracious and generous and said, yes, we can rent you our hall. And we've only just had a soft launch of Woolooware. So Soul Revival is still ministering to Woolooware, but it's actually meeting in the Cronulla Hall at St Andrews at Cronulla. And just in the last 3 weeks, it's been super interesting because that 25 people has grown to 50 people in just 3 weeks. So that's been a fascinating experiment.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you probably reflect on is that the arts team is stronger. And there's more young people going, and that's right. That's actually really helping.
So we took those learnings and that iterative design, we said, well, it was a good thing. We love Woolooware, but the things that we could probably strengthen at Woolooware was music, adding the extra ministry teams that were absent at Woolooware, including the communications team that we talked about and the arts team. And we've got this great opportunity to work with a really awesome young man who's just finished studying music at university, and his name's Brad. Yep. And Brad is now the new coordinator of music, and so he's also bringing his friends along to that. And so we've got young people coming as well as music and communications and the other service teams as well. So having the full Soul Revival experience down at Cronulla, I think, has helped to strengthen that ministry, and now we're up to that what could be a critical mass of 50 people a week.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Well, I think that kind of wraps it up for how we planned the fourth gathering and the things that we've learnt from that. Guys, if you have any other questions, thank you, by the way, so much for listening. We really appreciate it. If you do have any other questions for Stu or myself, you can email me at joel@shockabsorber.com.au. But next episode, we will probably have a look at what we decided to do after Woolooware, which was amazingly, we went after planting another 2 gatherings.
We did the next year, yeah.
So that means that we obviously continue to experiment and do different things. But using those learnings that we'd even learnt from Woolooware, that we needed more young people and all that kind of stuff. So really trying to fall back on our principles of the shock absorber. But for now, guys, thank you very much for listening. And as we always like to finish with one way.
Yeah, one way.
Thank you.